Λοιπόν, good morning. Welcome to this exciting panel. New world, new rules, perhaps new world, no rules. Certainly new panelists, which stepped into the breach after most of the other panelists had to cancel because of the strike. So thank you very much for that. Yesterday, I suppose, we realized that at least some of the old rules are still in play in this turbulent new world. For example, it's a bad idea to play chicken with the bond market, even if you're the United States of America. So that, in its way, is reassuring. But other than that, I would have to say that for Europeans and other allies of the US, the first 80 days of the new Trump administration have confirmed the worst fears and maybe something beyond that. I mean, we see an America that is inveterately hostile to free trade, extremely protectionist, is indifferent, if not actually a threat to European security, is very keen on rapprochement with Russia, wants to help its big tech companies avoid European regulation, and in general has become a source of instability and is very much uninterested, we should add, on collective efforts to deal with global public goods like health and the climate. So I would like to begin by asking you, George Papaconstantinou, the director of the School of Transnational Governance at EUI, and of course, a former finance minister of Greece. How we got here, and what do you see so far in terms of the European response to all this turbulence?
Thanks very much. I also assume you asked me to start because the title of the panel is actually the title of a book that we just came out with my co-author Jean-Pierre Ferry, who is supposed to be here. Never miss an opportunity to plug your book. So I leave
you to plug your own book.
Thank you.
Do it yourself.
I think to understand the moment, we need to take a step back. What we're seeing is in some sense a surprise, but not a complete surprise. For a while now, we have been living in a world where you had the combination of two forces: interdependence, because the idea that globalization is finished or has gone in reverse is plainly wrong, very strong interdependence, but at the same time, a lot of fragmentation. Fragmentation because of structural shifts happening in the world, the rise of China, the rise of middle powers from Brazil to Indonesia to Saudi Arabia, but also because of diverse preferences. A lot of these countries see things very differently from each other and from us. So you had this combination of interdependence and fragmentation, which meant that the old rules no longer applied. Having said that, we could still see a way forward in, for example, preserving global public goods such as climate, health, the digital commons, preserving basic channels of interdependence, trade, finance, or even what we could call behind-the-border integration, competition policy, tax coordination on international scale. So it was harder, but it was doable. You had an environment which was changing fast, but also where you could see new forms of collective action coming together and giving some kind of solution. Imperfect, but they were. So this was until 3 months ago. I think it's fair to say that we are now truly in a new environment. We're in a new environment because the main pillar of the post-war multilateral order, the country that basically created it in its own image and, of course, to pursue also its own interest, that acted as a guarantor of this order, became first a challenger. We already saw that under Biden and even before with Biden not reversing, for example, the Trump 1 views on trade, but now has become intent on demolishing this order. If you read some of the speeches of Secretary Rubio or others, it's really stunning to see how they call the world order a weapon against the US. Right? They believe that it is not just something that no longer functions, that it needs to be adapted. They say it is a weapon against the US. And all the tenets that hold together this order, from the kind of behavior in international security, the right of self-determination, territorial integrity, down to the role of multilateral institutions, rules-based behavior, all of this is out the door. And unfortunately, what makes it even more complicated is that we do not seem to be even in a transactional space. I think we thought this was going to be a transactional situation where, okay, the old rules did not apply, but we could cut deals, we could buy a bit more energy, we could buy a bit more defense. We are in a predatory space. So the new US administration is not even transactional, it is downright predatory. And that creates a huge challenge for the rest of the world, Europe and other countries, to deal with that. And I think part of what will be interesting in this discussion is what exactly we're going to do.
Thank you very much, George. George 1, because we have another George down there. Marco Buti, professor at the EUI and also the former Director General of ECFIN at the European Commission during a rather interesting time in its history. How new is this new world order or world disorder? And what should Europe do to become maximally resilient versus an American administration that seems to combine hostility and volatility in the worst possible way?
If one had to select one feature to characterize what is going on, what could this feature be? It seems to me that a key element is the logic of power that is being inserted into international relations. I mean, the international relations you look at from the US viewpoints, current administration, is actually seen as a series of separate zero-sum games. And that is, quintessentially, orthogonal to what the EU is about. But how new
zero-sum games, even with Lesotho and the Heard and McDonald Islands?
Zero-sum games, clearly. I mean, others they lose. Sometimes they lose big time. Even if we can agree that many of these moves are, ill thought out and ill-suited. Now, but how new is New World? This New World, from an economic viewpoint, it actually rhymes with the 1930s, 1940s, the pre-Bretton Woods period. I mean, we had at the time, if you look at along the two dimensions of free trade and free capital mobility, pre-Bretton Woods, we had neither. Nor free trade, nor free capital mobility. So Bretton Woods is a period, the Trente Glorieuses, but to a certain extent also after the early 1970s, when there was the breakdown of the gold-dominated international monetary system, we had free trade and no free capital mobility. Then we moved 1990s till 2016, period of hyper-globalization, where we had full freedom on both counts, both free trade and both free capital mobility. Then you take Trump 1, and I would say in continuity also Biden, because he did not reverse a number of decisions, we had a progressive erosion of free trade while still keeping free capital mobility. Now, we move into Trump 2, and the risk here is that we end up again with a full circle into no free trade and no free capital mobility. Actually, the no capital mobility is almost quintessential to the elimination of all bilateral trade imbalances, because the capital mobility is actually the counterpart of the trade, of the trade imbalances. So, so in a sense, we have gone full circle. Obviously, there are many novelties. One should not disregard them. But I think there is an element of that historically resonates. Now, what is the implications of these logical powers? I think essentially three elements. One, we have seen it, weaponization of trade and currencies. Second, disregard of interdependence or externalities. Third, contempt of multilateral institutions. Take this and apply to the EU, and you can see that we are, totally on a different plan. So you put a minus sign on those three elements, and you find the EU there. So what could be done, I think, in this? I think three elements again. One, in spite of what happened yesterday evening, I think they are devising a robust response to the trade aggression is paramount, because we have seen it in Mexico, we have seen with Canada. Trump cannot be trusted. So, it can come back and change things completely. Second is to build alliances with the rest of the world. So bottom-up multilateralism should be the name of the game. And third, medium-term in nature, but it is essential that the EU moves to a more indigenous, more autonomous growth model, which depends less of on external demand. I'm not talking about defense that goes together with the whole picture.
Yes, and it's a very important part of it. Perhaps we can touch on it later. Oksana, Antonenko, one concept that has been bandied about a lot in recent weeks as the chaos spreads from Washington is this idea of the coalition of the willing to deal with pressing problems in a context of a fragmenting Western alliance. What are the disadvantages, but also the drawbacks of this approach to solving collective problems?
Okay, well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me again, and I'm sorry for those people in the room who've been on my panel in the morning, because I have to repeat some of the things, but hopefully not everything that I said in the morning. So the first
Maybe you should say the complete opposite things to keep it interesting.
Yeah, maybe. Let's see. Maybe to start with, are we in the period of kind of change or drastic change? I mean, I certainly believe that we are in a new world, and global government, we're no longer talking about the reform or fine-tuning of the global governance. I think we are talking about a revolution. It is the real estate developers' approach to global governance, where the real estate developers, when they acquire a site, they start with demolition, and then they start building a new one. So we are now in a demolition state. Where the old system, however imperfect, is being demolished in front of our eyes. Secondly, what is actually emerging in its place? And again, this is not something which is new. We have been in this crisis of global governance for some time, although there was a lot of hope that maybe we can introduce some reforms that can bring it about. I think now we are no longer, as I said, in this phase. It is being replaced by the emergence of the groupings, be it regional groupings, or be it groupings based on the interests, or based on particular agenda issues. And we have several of them at the moment going. For example, in the context of European security, we are de facto seeing the emergence of the European Security Council, even though it is not called as such, but there's a number of countries, UK, of course, France, Germany, Poland, the Weimar countries that are driving now the agenda of, dealing with the consequences of Trump's change of policy on the war in Ukraine. We, of course, have groupings that have emerged recently within the context of the geopolitical rivalries between, the West and China and its kind of increasingly satellites like Russia or others, in the world of the geopolitical rivalries. Now, as we see the West imploding from within as a result of Trump's policies, I think a big question mark now whether those organizations like BRICS or Shanghai Cooperation Organization are actually going to survive, or how are they going to transform themselves here. And then we have, of course, groupings like, for example, G20, which initially emerged out of the necessity to deal with the global financial crisis, but then evolved into more kind of institutionalized and slow-moving animal? Are we going to see G20 being sprung back into action now on the eve of potential new economic crisis? I think the key challenge with those unilateral structures is to prevent them from being solidified into blocks. And as I mentioned in the morning, I think I like to think about it as blobs versus blocks. We need to see the world of blobs, where there's all these groupings that are flexible enough, that are pragmatic enough to be able to interact with each other, but rather than the divisions within the world, which solidifies around blocks, and as a result of that, leading us towards potential, more conflicts in the future.
All right, thank you very much. Last but certainly not least, Ambassador George Pagoulatos, Ambassador of Greece to the OECD, who I would like to tell us how destabilizing he finds the situation right now for Europe, and whether, George, you believe that the EU seems ready to do what is necessary to stand without the American umbrella.
Thank you, Yannis. Since I'm also carrying my official capacity rather than my previous capacity of an academic, which will also be my future capacity when I return to it, but I'm not eager to return there, earlier than necessary. I will speak with tremendous composure to the point of constipation.
As you always do, George. As you always do.
To the point of constipation. So let me try and give a broad picture of where we stand. We are in a world which is increasingly multipolar, while also remaining intensively bifurcated. Two superpowers, one third superpower on trade, the European Union, assertively rising, emerging powers as well. A rules-based multilateral global system which is falling apart in terms of the WTO, in terms of the UN, in terms of international treaties, which are becoming increasingly irrelevant, defied by major and even medium powers. The unity of the geopolitical West being questioned, not by its rivals, but I would say from within. And this is part of a longer continuity of the US turning from Europe towards Asia, which is something that started well before this administration. This new world disorder is driven by geopolitics, not geoeconomics, but geopolitical rivalry between the US and China is the result of geoeconomic developments. Globalization having delivered China to the status of a global superpower through trade. And this geopolitical confrontation, as was mentioned, takes the form of weaponization of economic interdependence. And economic interdependence is deep, is profound, exactly because we have been through the climax of globalization before moving to a slow globalization, as it's been called, but retaining a very strong elements of interdependence, despite the de-risking and even decoupling that has occurred over the previous years. And this interdependence means that the trade surpluses of both China and the European Union with the United States become a source of vulnerability. And tariffs are enlisted as an instrument for, among others, global macroeconomic rebalancing. Now, let me make an observation here that the rules-based multilateral order, or whatever preceded what we have today, has not worked against the interests of the United States. In fact, it has worked very well for the United States. The United States is the richest country in the world. It is the leader in technology, global leader in technology and AI. It has the best developed capital market. It has impressive productivity and productivity growth rates. And it has retained its position as a global leader economy in the world, despite the rise of China, while the European Union's position has been receding. So it has been the status quo has worked well for the United States. And what we have known in the past as the exorbitant privilege, and Marco traced the process from Bretton Woods all the way to globalization and then its gradual reversal. The exorbitant privilege, the status of the US dollar as a global reserve currency has allowed the United States to be able to live with high incomes, a high current account deficit that has been sustained at high levels, along with a fiscal deficit, as a result of copious capital inflows coming from surplus economies in the world. This doesn't seem to be a very bad position to be in, though certainly some rebalancing is needed. And in that rebalancing, the United States needs to save more, the European Union needs to invest more, and China needs to consume more. But certainly this rebalancing doesn't have to happen through extreme means. And there is an element in kind of transactional bilateralism. I would not necessarily endorse George's terminology on that. There's certainly a transactionalism on that. That if you enlist a kind of a world view of zero-sum, zero-sum games on the long run turn out to produce negative-sum outcomes. Because we know that when you have iterated games, cooperation is the best strategy, the most beneficial strategy for all. Win-win is the best strategy. And I was reading yesterday, there was a statement in the Financial Times describing the kind of the escalation of tariffs between the US and China. And the person quoted was saying that it's like two fighters in a ring who, after the 7th round, are exhausted and they're looking for the referee. Well, this referee is exactly the global rules-based system. According to social contract theories, that's why we devised rules in the first place, in order to be able, yes, to sustain global public goods, but also to be able to arbiter differences and to reduce the transaction costs of doing so between the players so that they can devote their energies towards growth, development, progress. So what I'm saying is that this disorder that we see today might be breeding a demand for stability and predictability, which is certainly lacking from today's environment. Uncertainty is the most crippling factor for economic investment, for economic growth, for everyone. And there are conditions for demand for greater certainty and clarity on the rules. And in that sense, I believe that what we are seeing today, behind the rhetoric, behind the toxicity, at a future stage, will produce something more rational. I remind you that the average effective tariff rate of the first Trump regime, despite the fact that Trump 1 also started with an avalanche of tariffs, was not more than 2.2%, according to the Financial Times. Today, it is up to over 20%. It's not going to stay there. So, yes, today it looks like something worse than the 30s in terms of the protectionism that has been erected, even close to the late 19th century, the McKinley era. But there is going to be a search for an equilibrium that will allow for greater cooperation to emerge, even if that has more pronounced transactional features compared to the rules-based order that preceded it.
Let's see if that happens, because the sense is that there will need to be a lot more destruction and
yes,
boxers in the ring before there is a genuine call and a willingness to build a new rules-based order. But George, I come back to you. You said something that stayed with me in your first intervention, which was that this is not even a transactional environment; it's a predatory United States that we're dealing with. The discussion before November 5th or before January 20th even was about whether Trump would stand with Europe in backing Ukraine. But then, at some point during the transition, we realized that he is talking about annexing European territory, Greenland, and seems to mean it. So my question is, the EU obviously is a peace project. Its whole way of working is based on reaching consensus and conciliating different interests. But Has it responded strongly enough to this kind of predatory behavior?
So I'm not a diplomat, and I'm no longer in politics. I'm an academic, so I can say whatever I want, and without sort of. So okay, it depends on which aspect of policy we're talking about. There are certain areas in which there are solutions, and the EU has fantastic opportunity. Before we get to the difficult ones, let me take one which is an easier one, which is climate. Okay, the US is 30% of global emissions. We can work without the US, with a coalition of the willing, with China, which has pivoted to green technology, and with emerging economies that would like to go in that way. We don't need the US there, and even within the US, there will be forces at the state level pushing the US even when it withdraws from the Paris Agreement. So, there are some parts of global public goods that we can keep working towards without the US or circumventing the US. Now, when you go to other global public goods, take digital commons, much trickier, because there we're going to have the full pressure from the US big tech to basically cash in on their support of the current administration and relax the European regulatory framework.
And
yes.
That's one of the theories that's been thrown out there, that if the EU really wants to take the gloves off, it shouldn't go into a conventional tit-for-tat tariff war, but it should go after big tech.
Yes, and I'm coming to that, exactly that. On big tech, yes, we are over-regulated in Europe. There's plenty of scope for simplification, but we cannot adapt a regulatory environment to the one that the US big tech means. So this is a big battle looming. And there, I think the EU is conscious of the problem, and it does have some tools in its arsenal. The main one is the anti-coercion instrument, which is the bazooka, which goes way beyond tit-for-tat retaliatory tariff behavior and can block either the operation of big tech or financial firms, US financial firms in Europe. So we're not there yet. The EU is thinking about using it, preparing to use it. So this is, and I think it is the correct way of doing it. We should not have jumped on this immediately and announced the activation of the anti-coercion instrument. Now then, trade and finance. I've been, over the last week, discussing a lot with friends, colleagues around Europe, and there's actually very smart people disagree on how aggressive the EU should be with tariffs. The EU has decided to go step by step. It could have gone much more aggressively and sort of matched China. It didn't. Probably this is a tactical game also, right? So seeing China's response, it is probably wise for the way that the EU has responded, and then we'll see. We will see how we certainly will need to go. I totally agree that with Marco before. This is not, despite yesterday, it's not over by any means. We will have to be much more aggressive than we are, and that leaves finance, and this is a fascinating area because. Until now, we had the US using the dollar with what we say as the exorbitant privilege, but also exorbitant duties, right? And the US seems to be kind of abandoning this, being totally predatory. And this opens up another opportunity for the EU. If the US wants to rebalance its external deficit on the trade side, there is a counterpart on this on the financial side. You cannot have one without the other, which kind of means that the role of the currency as an element of trust in international transactions is going to diminish. It is the first time, I think, where we can actually seriously have a conversation about the dollar no longer having the dominant role that it used to have in international financial transactions. And it's an amazing opportunity for the euro, because it is the only other stable currency that can come and supplement the dollar. We're already hearing people who are trying to hedge away from the dollar, who are trying to find alternative solutions, and they won't go to the renminbi. They're not going to the Japanese yen. They're not going to the pound. They could go to the euro. At which point, and that's my last sentence, for the EU to accelerate this, it needs to go much faster in the area that we've been talking about for a very long time, but we haven't done, which is completing the Savings and Investment Union and issuing much more common debt, because there is going to be an appetite for common debt now, which we have never seen before. And it is an absolutely unique opportunity to do that.
Excellent. I noticed Larry Summers said yesterday that the bond market is now treating the US as a problematic emerging market, so that's a great opportunity for the euro, as you say. Marco Buti, how heartened are you by the initiatives already taken for closer cooperation on the economy, but also on defense between the EU and other members of the Western Alliance, excluding the US? I mean, Canada, I mean, Japan. How well is that going?
I think we are on a verge of a breakthrough. It is a very delicate area, obviously. So I think what is emerging is more of a Schengen-type agreements involving not a coalition of the willing both within and outside Europe. That's what Schengen is. There are 29 countries. There are not all European countries, and there are others who are outside the EU. On this, I think it is very important that the Commission, the European institutions, play with esprit de finesse rather than political grandstanding, because it is so crucial in terms of national sovereignty that giving the impression that there is a bit of a power-grabbing strategy in Brussels, I think it would backfire. There will be discussions actually this week, proposals by colleagues in Bruegel of ESM for defense, so a new institution there. We would give financial power to this coalition of the willing. So I think that is it's an important development. I think we will have to get used to more variable geometry, I think, in Europe, because not everything can be kept within the classic community method, to use an expression typical of Brussels. But I think having this would articulate in defense what George indicated before, more generally in economic terms. So we have seen very important signal, Mark Carney coming to Europe before going to the US, as he was appointed Prime Minister. If you put all this together with the fact that the events of the last week may leave a trace in terms of the progressive de-anchoring of the international system, with the US, with the dollar being affected, potentially even with this systemic uncertainty that now built into the system. I think it may leave trace, and may leave great opportunities for Europe. I just want to give you a final example of the fact that we may be today in a different environment, so with the potential for Europe to reap the benefits of this. When we were all in trouble, deep troubles back in 2010, in this country in particular, but more broadly, with the euro area sovereign debt crisis, there was, I think it was August 2010, Standard & Poor's downgraded the US signature for the first time ever. So they lost the AAA. this was a shock to the whole system. And the reaction at the time, actually, of the markets was, in spite of the fact that the crisis originated in the US with the downgrading, we suffered in the first place. So the financial instability crossed the Atlantic immediately, and created huge fragmentation within the Eurozone, with some countries, more vulnerable countries, being more exposed than others.
I vaguely
this
remember.
has not happened this time around. So external fragmentation, which is probably even more pronounced now than it was at the time, has not resulted in internal fragmentation in the EU. So this tells you that, in a sense, we have the potential, we are probably better equipped to reap the benefits and the opportunities, but understanding clearly that you cannot leave projects half done. So we have to complete capital markets union, so saving and investment union, as it's called now. We have to complete banking union. Nobody talks about that, but it's fundamental for this. And I think the way to convince leaders on this is not to make the classic, financial or economic arguments, which is perfect, but they are not ready to listen to the argument. It is essential to play the geopolitical relevance of this. So you can play a role in the international arena, in the new international division of labor, politically, only if you strengthen yourself domestically. So it means doing what is necessary for growth and stability, complete these projects, and do what is necessary on the defense.
If there's ever a time where this message will resonate, it is now. Oksana, obviously the area where the coalition of the willing idea has been talked about more is defense, and this effort by Europe and its friends to make up for the growing absence of the US in the effort to defend Ukraine. Ukraine, by the way, is the subject of the next panel. How is that going? Will the Europeans and their friends be able to create both a plan for the peace and for their own role in defending that peace, which will prevent the creation of facts on the ground by an understanding between Putin and Trump, which will be very much at the expense of Ukraine?
Yes, I mean, I think the short answer to that, and I know we are running out of time, is that we are 3 years too late. We should have started it a long time ago. So now we are starting in a more challenging environment. I disagree slightly with Marco that there's no divisions within Europe. There are fundamental and profound divisions when we start looking in detail of how the procurement of defense equipment is going to take place. At the moment in Europe, we have 14 types of armored personnel carriers. Most of them cannot interoperate with each other. We need to bring in the economies of scale, where there is a joint procurement. We have to put aside the national interests. All of that is a profound issue of division and geopolitical issues within the European Union. And we haven't even started. We are very early at the early stages of this journey. I think the good news, there are several good news in this challenging environment. The first one is that the technological revolution is on our side. We actually need to take advantage of the fact that the warfare, as the Ukrainians have shown us very well, is changing quite profoundly. So we do not need to buy more tanks, although we probably need to buy more tanks, but not spend all 800 billion on tanks and digging trenches. We have a situation, first of all, where there is a much more off-the-shelf drone technology which is now available and absolutely playing the key role. We also, of course, have Ukraine, which is already producing a lot of these weapons and which we can much cheaper and much better, so we can invest there. And finally, of course, we have a situation now where certain countries within the European Union are prepared to spend more because they feel urgent and immediate threat to them. And that, of course, again, talking about divisions, not all countries. We have lots of countries in the south of Europe that do not share the same threat perception and the same strategic culture. So there are some good news. But generally speaking, I'm extremely worried that the white paper, which was just produced by the Commissioner for Defense, has a 5 to 7 year horizon. So the idea is that we in Europe have to be, in 5 years, prepared to face a war with Russia. But what is happening at the moment, every day, we're seeing that the security environment in Europe is becoming more and more challenging. So we do not have 5 to 7 years. And, we need to move much faster. And I think the jury is still out to what extent, those loans actually going to be taken by member states, because that is taking additional loan burden, which, as you know, there's a stigma attached to it, etc. And finally, whether we were able to spend it on the things we really need.
Let's hope that the sense of threat spurs innovation. Ambassador Pagoulatos, as quickly as you possibly can. The boxers in the ring are punching each other fiercely. How afraid should we be about the repercussions for the European economy of the US-China trade war?
Well, we should certainly be very worried. I mean, we are entering a period of stagflation, apparently stagflation in the US. This will clearly have implications for the rest of Europe. But may I focus on Europe's greatest strength on the medium and longer term, and that is the single market. The European Union has prospered on a combination of what we could summarize as Adam Smith abroad, open trade abroad, and social contract at home. What we're seeing on the other side of the Atlantic is protectionism abroad and competitive deregulation at home. This creates a very adverse environment in which the European Union can compete, but it certainly needs to adjust certain elements of its internal market in order to be able to become more competitive. And we've seen these prescriptions in the Draghi report, saw them before in the Letta report. There was a recent study of the IMF that points out that the internal barriers inside the European Union amount to about 100% tariff for services, 45% manufacturing. Now, these are areas of priority. Going about them and completing the capital market is the road towards strengthening the European Union. And by strengthening the European Union, we strengthen the main guarantor and pillar of the global rules-based multilateral order.
Okay, I want to thank you all very much. That's all the time we have. Thank you for your attention. And the next panel on Ukraine begins immediately.